When we think of the Native American experience during the age of colonialism, a single, heartbreaking image often comes to mind. That of a brave but ultimately outmatched people overwhelmed by a relentless tide of European expansion. But history is rarely that simple. And to find a story of indigenous power that consistently and decisively dominated colonial forces, we must turn to the saga of the Comanche. In terms of sheer martial skill, the Comanche were unparalleled. They were the deadliest mounted warriors ever to fight on the American continent, possessing a cultural ferocity akin to the ancient Spartans and a lethality in battle that rivaled the Mongol horde. Today we'll explore how these horse lords of the southern grasslands became the most dominant tribe in the American West, how they humbled the greatest colonial powers of the 18th century, and how they built the most formidable indigenous empire in the Western Hemisphere. The Comanche weren't always masters of the Great Plains. Originally, they were a nomadic offshoot of the northern Shoshone people, living as small bands of hunter-gatherers in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in what is now Wyoming and Utah. In the pre-Columbian era, these were foot-bound people, hunting deer in the forests and fishing for salmon, living a sustainable but humble life. But a period of global cooling known as the Little Ice Age put immense pressure on this existence. By the mid-1600s, a new branch of eastern Shoshone had migrated to the northern Great Plains, transforming their diet and culture to revolve around the vast, seemingly endless herds of bison. This was a difficult and hazardous existence, as they hunted the massive 2,000-pound beasts on foot, using dog-pulled sleds to carry their belongings. But soon, everything would change. When the Spanish arrived in the New World, they brought with them many things that changed the landscape forever, from guns and new religions to devastating diseases. While most of these forces brought destruction, one reintroduced element would fundamentally empower the native peoples: the horse. For Plains tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Shoshone, the horse was a miracle. It could carry 4 times the weight of a dog and cover double the distance in a day. Hunters could now pursue bison over a wider range and ride them down instead of laboriously herding them off cliffs. The world became smaller, its resources more accessible, and throughout the 18th century, numerous tribes were revolutionized into mounted, powerful nations. During this pivotal period, a small group of Shoshone broke away, embarking on a long migration south into what is now Texas. This southern region also teemed with bison, but it held something even more valuable: proximity to the Spanish colony of New Mexico, the very heart of the American horse trade. These migrants knew that the horse was the key to power, and to control the flow of horses was to become masters of the land. It wasn't long before they established themselves as the overlords of the region, subjugating local tribes and seizing control of the horse trade. In a breathtakingly short period, just 2 generations, they transformed from a foot-bound people into an entirely horseback society. They called themselves the Nermernu, the people, but their new neighbors knew them by a Ute word for enemy: the Comanche. When the Comanche burst onto the scene in the early 1700s, the American South was not an empty place. The Spanish were established in Texas and New Mexico, the French were in Louisiana, and various other mounted native nations roamed the grasslands. Yet, of all these regional players, the Comanche proved to be the most brutally effective at establishing their supremacy. Their first major victim was the Plains Apaches, a brave and formidable people in their own right, who were no match for the relentless Comanche assault. By 1740, most Apaches were either killed, enslaved, or driven south off the plains. Many other local tribes met a similar fate, or were forced into a subordinate role within Comanche alliances. The Comanche were just as relentless in their attacks on the white colonial powers. Starting in the 1720s, Comanche war parties began ravaging the settlements of New Spain, carrying off thousands of horses, cattle, and captives with near-total impunity. Spanish armies sent from Mexico City were defeated time and again by faster, more skilled Comanche warriors who mastered the art of guerrilla warfare. Entire settlements were abandoned as New Mexico's population fled in terror. At the height of Spain's imperial claims to North American territory, it was the Comanche who ensured they would never advance beyond Texas. What made the Comanche so uniquely dominant? They were, in the words of historian S.C. Gwynn, the only full-time warrior society in their region, much like the ancient Spartans. Unlike other tribes, they didn't farm or make pottery. Their entire culture was stripped down to the hunting of bison and the fighting of men. This brutal, Spartan lifestyle produced a nation where every single military-aged male was a fully trained professional soldier. Their fighting style, however, was closer to that of the Mongols. They were horse archers par excellence, capable of firing a dozen arrows in the time it took a Spanish soldier to load and fire a single musket shot. Their raids were notoriously brutal, and they wielded fear as a weapon. But to see them only as killers is to miss a crucial part of the story. At its heart, the Comanche Empire was a trade empire. They leveraged their central position on the continent to establish vast trading networks, forging strategic alliances with nations like the Kiowas, Utes, and Wichitas. Through these networks, they traded with the French, English, and even the Spanish, as often as they fought them. They supplied Europeans with bison meat and furs, and, most importantly, with horses. The Comanche were also deeply involved in the slave trade, capturing not just native people, but also mestizos, blacks, and whites. Captives might be sold to the Spanish or assimilated directly into the Comanche nation, because, in their society, a person's identity was not defined by race. Anyone could become a Comanche, and conversely, anyone could be enslaved. It's important to note that the Comanche were never a politically unified people. Instead, they were more like the great nomadic confederations of the Eurasian steppe, like the Scythians or the Mongols. As many as 13 different bands roamed the plains, often fighting among themselves, but capable of uniting to make war on the settled civilizations on their frontiers. In their society, leadership was earned through merit, and women enjoyed greater freedom and autonomy than in European colonial society. At the dawn of the 19th century, the Comanche Empire was at its peak, but the world was changing around them. The old European empires were giving way to new nations, the United States and Mexico. The Comanche took full advantage of the chaos of the Mexican War of Independence, launching a new wave of raids that hastened the collapse of Spanish power. When Mexico gained its independence in 1821, it briefly sought an alliance with the Comanche as a buffer against American expansion. But when Mexico failed to uphold its trade agreements, the Comanche responded with a relentless spree of raids that ravaged northern Mexico, rendering it into a depopulated wasteland. Ironically, Mexico was forced to invite American settlers into Texas as a buffer against the very people they had initially hoped to use. This decision backfired spectacularly. The settlers turned on their Mexican hosts, and in 1836, the Republic of Texas was born. Any hope of peace was instantly shattered. As Texans expanded their farms and ranches into Comanche territory, the Comanche struck back. In the famous raid on Fort Parker, they captured a 9-year-old girl, Cynthia Ann Parker, who would live as a Comanche for the next 24 years. The Texans, however, found an answer to the Comanche's speed and firepower in a revolutionary new weapon, the Colt revolver. As the old saying goes, God created men, but Samuel Colt made them equal. In 1845, Texas joined the United States, and the matter was permanently settled in the Mexican-American War. The U.S. Army marched into a northern Mexico so devastated by Comanche raids that it offered little resistance. The Comanches' own success had ironically paved the way for the very people who would eventually bring them down. The most famous chief to resist this American advance was Quanah Parker, the half-American son of the captive Cynthia Ann Parker. But the Comanche were facing a different kind of war. The repeating rifles and revolvers of the American army were a far cry from the muskets their fathers had outrun and outshot. Yet, it was not superior firepower that ultimately brought about the end of the Comanche. In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, and a tidal wave of settlers began to pour west. But the final blow was systematic starvation. The U.S. government intentionally targeted the Plains people's primary food source, the buffalo. What followed was one of the greatest mass slaughters in human history. Hunters with repeating rifles culled millions of buffalo, leaving their bodies to rot across the plains. With the death of the bison, the empire of the Comanche came to an end. In 1874, Chief Quanah Parker led his band in one final defiant war against the United States. His was the last free band of the Nermernu. Despite a fierce fight, they were defeated. In the summer of 1875, Quanah and his warriors marched into Fort Sill and surrendered. Comancheria was no more. The great wild plains where they once roamed were turned into the farms and ranches of the Americans who came to replace them. But the Comanche people are not just a historical memory. Today, they are a federally recognized tribe with over 17,000 enrolled members, many of whom are concentrated in Oklahoma. Their empire may be gone, but their traditions, their resilience, and their sense of identity endure. And with it, the memory of the horse lords of the Southern Plains lives on. More videos on Native American history are on the way, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified. Your support by liking, commenting, and sharing helps us immensely. This video is based on extensive research from respected historians, with references provided on screen to explore further. We hope you'll join us for the next chapter in history.